This is Hera. We are doing an FU12 Life Narrative interview with participant 4337. Today's date is February 8th, 2019. This is an interview about the story of your life. Our purpose in these interviews is to get to know you better and to catalog people's life stories. Please know that there are no right or wrong answers to my questions. Instead, your task is simply to tell me about some of the most important things that have happened in your life and how you imagine your life developing in the future. I will guide you through the interview so that we can finish it in about an hour to an hour and a half. Since we're beginning around 9:30, we'll try to complete this by 10:30 or 11 at the latest. I think that you'll enjoy this interview since a lot of people do.
Good.
I should also let you know that I need to read the questions to you exactly as they are written for the sake of the research. It's not a test in any way, but we want to be consistent in the way we ask the questions.
Okay.
I'm also not able to provide a lot of feedback or responses to what you say as I don't want to influence your story. We want to hear your life story from your perspective without being influenced by me at all, so please don't worry if I don't seem very responsive. I'm simply trying to avoid influencing the way in which you tell your story. You may also see me write something down every now and then. I'm not evaluating you at all. I'm simply making a note of the parts of your life that you mention. Since some of the questions are long and have multiple parts, I'm happy to repeat anything you want, and please feel free to ask.
Okay.
And in addition, if you need a break at any point, please let me know.
All right.
Are you ready to begin?
Sure.
All right. I would like you to begin by thinking about your life since the age of 18, as if it were a book. Imagine that each major period or aspect of your life represents a chapter in the book. You may have between 2 to 5 chapters. Please provide me with a title for each chapter and then describe very briefly what each chapter is about. We'll want to spend about 10 minutes total on this first section of the interview, so please keep your descriptions of the chapters very brief. So, what would you like to title your first chapter?
College years.
All right. And can you tell me a little bit about...
Well, I was actually 17 when I started college because I started school as a 5-year-old in first grade. There was no kindergarten in my school.
Yeah.
So I turned 18, after I'd been in college for a few years. I went to college at Southeast Missouri State University. And although I think it was Southeast Missouri State College when I started, I think it became a university while I was there, in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Lived in the dorm, had lots of friends, went home, I don't know, maybe once a month, every 6 weeks, something like that. It was only a 2-hour drive to go home. I don't remember anything outstanding about my freshman year. I think maybe I pledged a sorority the second semester of my freshman year, but that might have been my sophomore year. I was in the Alpha Delta Pi. My sister was already there. She's 2 years older, and she was a member of that same sorority. So most of my friends were there, even though I still lived in the dorm, although I had a lot of friends in the dorm too. Let's see. The sorority that I was in did a lot of philanthropic work, and that's really what I enjoyed the most. Right now I can't remember even one of those things, though. I was an elementary education major. I decided I wanted to be a teacher at a very young age and stuck with that all the way through. While I was in college, I became active in several different things. I did go to student senate meetings, although I wasn't a member of the student senate, I don't think. I was active in the Association of Women Students, and as my senior year, I was the president of that organization. Also, in my junior, senior year, I guess that overlapped, I guess before that I was on an organization called Freshman Orientation Week, people who planned the things for freshmen to do during Freshman Orientation Week, and I was the president of that group. Probably wasn't called president, I don't know, chairperson of that group when I was a senior. So, it's pretty active in a lot of things. What else do I want to say about that? Didn't date a lot in college. Some dated a high school boyfriend for a few years, but that didn't work out. And a couple other, not anything very serious. Graduated in 4 years, which was the norm in those years, even though it's not any now. And got a teaching job before I graduated. So started teaching the next year. Okay, so I guess we should start the next chapter now.
Yeah. What would you title that?
What should I title that? New life in the big city. I grew up on a cotton farm in southeast Missouri, but I did not want to move back there. So I got a teaching job in the St. Louis area, but not in St. Louis County. It was in Jefferson County. The school district was based out of House Springs, Missouri. Good grief. But my job was the farthest school out. So it was in Dittmer, Missouri, teeny tiny. It was literally a country school. Mm-hmm. Although a big country school. I mean, there were probably 300 or 400 kids in that school. And I taught first grade. And when I first moved up here, I lived in House Springs, which was a teeny tiny town. And the people, in an apartment, I was not asked to sign a lease, and after 6 weeks, I think I moved in the middle of August maybe. By the end of September, they asked me to sign a lease, and by that time I decided there's no way I'm going to last a year here, because it was almost scary being way out in the country by yourself like that. So I moved to St. Louis County, and the rest of the year I was in a carpool, and so those were probably my closest friends. I rode to school with 5 people, and it was about a 45-minute drive because it was before Highway 30 had been enlarged. It was 2-lane road. I hated the drive. Hated. And so I was determined to get a job in St. Louis County, and I did after 3 years, but I actually had to quit that job in order to do that because school districts didn't want to interview me before. So in those early years of teaching, inflation was going like this, and teaching salaries were going like this. So every year I moved to an apartment that was a little bit cheaper. I had a roommate a couple of different times in those years. But after doing that, 2 different roommates, I decided I'd rather live by myself, so I did. Met my husband. Oh, no, I guess this is an important thing. I became active in the United Methodist Church that was close to my first apartment in St. Louis County, and started teaching the youth Sunday school class there, and then was in charge of the youth group also. And I did that for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years. I met my husband because he was in charge of a youth group in another church in the district, and that's how we met. Back to the teaching part, I taught first grade for 2 years, then I taught kindergarten for 1 year in that school in Jefferson County. That was a really hard year. I had 26 kids in the morning and 27 in the afternoon, and no teacher's aide at all. It was really hard. The next year, I got a job in Lindbergh School District, but it was only a half-time job, so I worked at a bookstore, and I taught school in the morning. I worked about 60 or 70 hours a week total, which is not a big deal compared to life as a working mom later on. Yeah. Then I taught 3rd grade, and then I taught at a different school the last year, but the same school district, taught 2nd grade. And then I got riffed by Lindbergh School District. That means reduction in faculty. because they had to let go all the non-tenured teachers because of reduced enrollment, and went to Kirkwood School District. And that was the same year that I met my husband, and we got married at the end of that first year in Kirkwood. And after a year being married, I got pregnant, and so then I guess that's the end of that chapter.
Okay. What would you title chapter 3? I'll title it Early Years of Marriage and just talk about those early years. Okay.
So I got married in 1981, and my husband worked in a bicycle shop. And I was teaching. We lived in a rental house that was a pretty large for a 2-bedroom house, brick house, for $200 a month. Can you believe that? In Afton, which was a pretty nice neighborhood. Small yard. I enjoyed taking care of the yard. We decided to have... I was 28 when we got married. So I was 29 when I got pregnant and 30 when my daughter was born. I knew that I wanted to be a mom. I really wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, but that did never happen. My daughter was born in February of 83. We still lived in the rental house, but that summer, with some help from my folks, we bought a house in Webster Groves. My husband had grown up in Webster Groves, and that's when we started looking at houses. There was something wrong with every house that wasn't in Webster Groves, so that's where we bought a house. We had a very small 2-bedroom house with a humongous yard on Oak Tree Drive, and the reason it was called that is because there were so many oak trees, and we had 4 large oak trees in our yard. My father said we really bought the yard, not the house, and that was kind of true because the yard was great. My daughter was, I guess, 5 months old when we moved in there. It was one of the really hot summers in St. Louis when we had to move out of our house and live with his mom for a few weeks because it was 85 degrees in our house in the middle of the night. Yeah. And then we moved at the end of July, although he and his brother did all of the moving of the furniture in the middle of the night because it was too hot to do it in the daytime. The new house was air conditioned with central air, thank goodness. My daughter went to a babysitter and then a daycare after that. Having to do it over, I would never go to a babysitter again. I would go straight to daycare because it was much better care. Yes, she did get a lot of ear infections and colds and stuff, but by the time my kids got to school, they were never sick because they'd built up a lot of antibodies. Yeah. My son was not born until my daughter went to kindergarten because we couldn't afford to put 2 kids in daycare. And so he was born in 88, June of 88. The school that my daughter went to was, I don't know, half-mile away. She went to the neighbor's house when I left for school, and she'd walk to school with her friend. After school, what did she do after school? After school, she went to an after-school program there, run by the YMCA. No, Webster, I think, is run by the school district. By this time, I was in Kirkwood School District, so my drive to school was only about 10 minutes away. When my son was born, I cannot believe I'm getting so many texts. Sometimes I don't get one, for hours at a time. By the time my son was born, my husband and I had bought a bicycle shop in 85, 86. That was a miserable failure. But the only thing he ever wanted to do, that was his dream. And it was a man that he had worked for many years before who wanted to retire, and he supposedly was giving us such a deal, and turned out to not be a deal at all. He'd kind of run the business into the ground, and my husband, who was an excellent mechanic and a wonderful person in many ways, was a terrible businessman. So that was a failure. That lasted about 2.5 years, and I worked there on every Saturdays. I did the bookkeeping, which I was not trained to do at all, and I helped in the shop some. My daughter was 3 at the time. She would spend every Saturday in the little office in the back of the shop. By the time my son was born, the bike shop had closed, or it did close. I think it closed in January, and Ned was born in June. And Dick was, what did he? It seems like maybe he was unemployed for a very short time. And then he got a job in a salvage yard through somebody at church. But we still had to pay for that bike shop for years. We paid, I think, $500 a month. Plus we were paying several $100s for babysitting and child care. I can't tell you a lot about those years because I was so sleep deprived and stressed that unfortunately I remember very little about my son's childhood. The early years especially. I mean, there was like 2 or 3 or 4 years there that I basically can't remember at all.
Yeah.
So, next chapter. I'm going to skip forward since there's a few years there I can't remember.
Okay.
In 94, when my son was 6 years old, my brother-in-law, who had been living in my mother-in-law's house for 15 years and abusing it with friends, drugs, animals, etc., decided to move out of the house and asked my husband if we would like to move into it. It was a 4-bedroom house in Webster Groves.
Mm.
The house itself was very nice, but I mean, it was so filthy and so awful that the people next door could smell the house inside their house. His mom said we could live there for $200 a month while we worked on the house. So that summer, we worked on it really hard just to get it enough to be able to live in it. The kitchen had been redone 4 or 5 years before, and it wasn't in bad shape. The rest of it we'd rip all the carpet out, and we paid to have the floors redone, which we didn't have money to do. We took out a loan to do this and got it livable. Moved in. My daughter was now in 6th grade, and we actually drove her over to the bus stop near that house because we didn't really move until the end of September. So that was a big mistake because I did not know about all the problems in that house. Ironically, my husband's father was a psychologist, also a Methodist minister, one of the founders of Caring Counseling. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's a counseling agency, social service agency in St. Louis area. But like the plumber with leaky pipes, everyone in the family had emotional depression issues.
Yeah.
And all that kind of came back when we moved there. He wanted to move there. I don't understand that. Anyway, so those few years were not good at all. We went to marriage counseling. I think we had been to marriage counseling some even before that, but we really went a lot during those 2 years. And he also had attention deficit disorder, which I had known for years, but wouldn't get medication. So after, in the spring of 97, the counselor finally said to him, that if he didn't get treated for ADHD and depression. There was really nothing she could do to help us. And he refused to do that. And so in April of that year, I said, around that time, my daughter, who was 14, was actually saying, why do we have, his behavior was so erratic at home. Why do we have to do this? Why can't we just move out? And I kind of took that as a sign from God to say, okay, it's time to give up. Yeah. So I did, and told him, I said, we'll stay till the end of the school year. So that's a few months for you to decide to get treatment. If you'll get treatment, then, I'm not going to move out. Otherwise, the kids and I are moving out in June. And we did. It was hard. I started over with nothing because we were still paying for the bike shop.
Yeah.
So at that point, that had been 10 years, I guess, since we bought it. No, I take that back. Actually, we had sold our house. Yeah, I kind of forgot that. When we moved to his mom's house, we rented our house for a year to some Webster U students. Mm-hmm. That didn't work out. So we sold the house after a year, and we paid off the bike shop and had enough money that we took one really nice vacation that year to Yellowstone and a week in Montana with my sister's family. But even then, Dick slept most of that trip. I mean, we would be going places and he'd be sleeping in his room at the condo. It was just crazy. I've lost my train of thought now. Yeah. So we moved out. Yeah. And when we moved out, I had to actually borrow money from my folks for the first month's rent in a house. We were able to find a house in Webster Groves, right on the very edge of the school district. Very nice house, but no backyard, which was hard for my son because he was a very active kid. Okay, so next chapter would be the new life, I guess.
Yeah, so I actually didn't get a title for that chapter that you just described to me. What would you like to title that? We have college years, new life in the big city, early years of marriage.
I guess let's call that overworked.
So the last chapter, you want to title it New Life?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm one of the few people whose financial situation improved after divorce.
Yeah.
Because, not right away, because like I said, I started out with nothing. I mean, we had sold our house to pay off the business. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't, I had one less mouth to feed. I wasn't paying his health insurance anymore. My life was a lot less stressed. Yeah. So within 2 years, I was able to buy a house. Because in those days, what year was it, 99? You could buy a house without a down payment. Mm. But I think my parents gave me a few $1,000s to have some kind of a down payment. So I bought the house that I live in now. I still live in that house, so it's almost 20 years now. Mm. 2-bedroom house, but we made a bedroom for my son in the basement. Yeah. And my father built a wall down the middle of the basement so that one side was for Ned. He loved it because he had so much space. In the winter when it was cold like this, so he had to sleep upstairs on the couch because it'd be too cold. Well, we did have it heated, but anyway. So we lived in the rental house for 2 years. By this time, my son was in 3rd grade, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 3rd grade, and my daughter was a freshman in high school. No. A sophomore or junior in high school, I guess. Sophomore in high school. Um, so, I mean, my life kind of revolved around the kids, scouts, and I wasn't a scout leader anymore at that point, though, because I had done that for Becky, but by that time she was out of scouts. And I was a Cub Scout leader with my husband, but neither one of us, no, I think he did it one year with somebody else, but not successfully. The arrangement was that, I think legally, the divorce papers said that they would be with him on Wednesday evening and spend every other weekend. But he didn't have any beds for them and didn't really care. So what we really did is that they spent every Sunday with him, which was very awkward because in the beginning we would all come to church. He would still come to church, and then I guess the kids would go home with him after church, but I mean, he didn't keep coming to church for very long, but that was probably the hardest part, I guess, for me. And it took me a while to get used to having Sundays by myself. Anyway, like I said, my daughter was involved in band at high school, and I was a member of a group that supported the band there at the high school, and I did things with the PTO at my son's school, so our life kind of revolved around their life. After 2 years, we bought the house that we live in now, but it did take 2 years before the divorce was final, though, which was ridiculous because we didn't really fight about anything, but his lawyer tried to nitpick over a few things. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't really asking for much other than just child support. I mean, I said that I didn't ask that he pay insurance or do the college education because I knew he didn't have the money to do that. Mm-hmm. So we moved to that house, and we were, we loved living in that house, and they were busy. My daughter graduated from high school in 2001, went off to Kirksville to Truman University for a year. How many years am I supposed to be covering? I need to stop here.
Oh, so this involves your life from the age of 18 through now, yeah.
Oh gosh, I am telling way too many details then. Okay. Well, we probably should do the next chapter then.
Yeah, it's actually just between 2 to 5 chapters, so do you want to redo this? Or
How many chapters am I on now?
Yeah, you're allowed, you have 5 chapter titles now.
I do already have 5?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's too bad, because I haven't covered enough.
If you want to rewrite your chapter titles, that's okay too.
No, I don't want to do that. We'll just crowd all this into one.
Into new life, okay.
My daughter went off to university and was not very happy there. Her boyfriend was at another university, and he was a serious student, didn't have time to instant message with her, and so she decided to start instant messaging with his best friend who was in school someplace else, and then she decided to dump the boyfriend that she'd had for 2 years and go out with him. I forgot to mention that my daughter, who was like the angel child until 16, decided that she would convince her boyfriend to start having sex, which truly, just blew me away. I mean, I did take her to a doctor to get on birth control pills because I didn't want her to end up being pregnant. Mm-hmm. She was unhappy about that, and when she went off to college, she quit taking them because she had gained weight. Anyway, she more or less seduced the boyfriend's best friend, got pregnant right after her freshman year in college, and was married by October and had a child in April of 2003. The problems of teenage marriage never end. She had a second child 4 years later because she was mad at her doctor and wouldn't go back to get new birth control pills. But it was not a happy marriage even then, so the first daughter, who was very, very smart, and people just doted over her, and she was reading by the time before she went to kindergarten. Second daughter was, in my opinion, kind of ignored.
Yeah.
And had a terrible time in school. They divorced when the kids were, I think, 4 and 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
She moved into a rental house and had her father move in with her to kind of help out. But shortly after that, she moved in the boyfriend that's now her husband, even though she wasn't divorced yet. She tried to say that she tried to tell the girls that he was living in the basement because he didn't have a place to live. And I think he slept in the basement when the girls were there because they were only there every other week. They lived with their dad half the time. My granddaughter's grandmother on the other side developed ovarian cancer and died when the girls were, let's see, what would that be, 8 and 12 years old. And she was kind of the glue that held that family together. So a year or so after that, they quit living with Dad half the time. By that time, Dad I already said Dad lived with his parents because he didn't like living by himself.
Mm-hmm.
So things have been terrible there. The 15-year-old is depressed and hasn't been in school for more than a year and is supposedly homeschooled, but is not homeschooled successfully and really sleeps and does not much of anything. And my daughter is so stressed out, it's ridiculous. She did marry that other person, Sam, who has now... he did have a job. They both went through training through... Do you know what launch code is?
Mm-hmm.
And she has a really good job. He had a good job for about a year, and he has been unemployed since now for a year and a half. Yeah, a year and a half about. He's had a few part-time jobs. He's also very depressed and has been hospitalized a few times. My granddaughter has been... Actually, everyone in the family, all 4 of them, has been seeing therapists for years. And yet, they keep seeing the same therapist, and I feel like they're not successful.
Yeah.
So, my life there's a lot of worry there. I do spend a fair amount of time driving the girls around to places. I used to do a lot of stuff with them when they were younger, but not so much anymore. Not as much. My son lived with me until he was 28, I guess. He went to college for 8 years, part-time, and finally quit. He was an education major and decided that that's not really what he wanted to do. He quit a few years ago. I'm going to say it's been 5 years since he quit school. And he worked for the same pool company for about 10 years, but he didn't have a job in the wintertime. But now he works for a different pool company where he works year-round because they take care of most of the indoor pools in the St. Louis area, including the YMCAs and Gold's Gyms and places like that. He moved out, lived with a friend. I guess he was maybe 27, 28. He moved out for almost a year and then moved back in for another year and a half. And then lived with another friend for a few years, although he lived with his girlfriend most of the time. And now he does live with his girlfriend full time. She's a nurse, a delightful young woman who's also from Webster Groves, although she's younger than him, and they did not know each other in high school because she went to Catholic school and she's younger than him. She comes from a family with a lot of money, and I worry about that because that's not his life. But they've been together now for 5 or 6 years, and she was working out of state most of that time, though, as a traveling nurse. But now she's in St. Louis and has a full-time job. At Christian Northeast, that's actually a 9-to-5 job, which is kind of unusual for nurses to be able to get. She's a case manager now. They seem happy as clams. I'm not sure why they aren't getting married. I think he's worried about the money issue, but I don't really know. So, I see them pretty often, and we have a good time together. And I see my daughter's family. I try to have them over for supper at least once a week when I'm here. I currently live with my father half the time in southeast Missouri. My mother died of Alzheimer's about a year ago, and I retired from teaching in May of this past year. So after that, I started living with Dad half the time, except during the winter. He lives in Florida in the winter, and my siblings have the time and the money that they rented a house close to him, so they take turns being down there in the wintertime. So my father's 93, but for 93 he's pretty amazing. He still plays golf. In Florida he also plays bocce. Mm-hmm. He gets around and does, he wants to do a lot of things. He still drives, although he should not. I will not get in the car with him, and neither will most of them. I don't think anyone in my family will.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think his friends will anymore either. So that's not a lot of fun, but it's okay. I live on the farm with him, and it's, it's different than living in the city.
Yeah.
So I've adjusted to that. And I retired in May after 44 years of teaching school, although the last 4 were only part-time. And I have a lot of good friends that I, socialize with and can count on to help me when I need help, or I help them when they need help. A couple of those people don't drive, so the rest of us help drive them around. Other than the situation with my daughter's family, which is really hard,
if you need a break at any point, please let me know.
I'm sorry, what?
If you need a break at any point, please feel free to let me know. I'm very sorry that you're going through.
If I could compartmentalize my life, that part of my life is just like the hell that doesn't end, and the rest of it is great. I live in a nice neighborhood. I have good friends. I don't have a lot of money, but I have the money to do things that it'd be fun to have money to travel a lot. I don't have that kind of money because, unlike most people my age, I still have a huge house payment since I started over when I was 47.
Yeah.
But even that, I consider myself very lucky to be able to do all the things that I can't do. It's just that I can't control the situation with my daughter's family, and in a lot of ways I feel like, why couldn't I have done something to avoid this? What went wrong to turn her life so badly? Because she was really a good student, good friends, good. I thought she would go off to college and be a successful. Well, she wanted to be a musician. I tried to convince her that she should get an education degree. She did end up graduating from college along with the help from my parents and got a degree in English, but then to teach English.
Mm-hmm.
But after student teaching, decided she didn't want to do that. That's when she worked various part-time jobs and then got that job through Launch Code. So that's where I am today. And I think that's probably a good place to stop.
Yeah. Well, thank you for going through all of that with me. I know a lot of this is hard to talk about, but I appreciate you being as candid and honest as you've been.
Yeah.
For the next part of the interview, could you please describe a scene or moment in your life that stands out as an especially positive experience? This might be the high point scene of your entire life, or else an especially happy, joyous, exciting, or wonderful moment in the story. Please describe what happened, when and where it occurred, who's involved in what you were thinking and feeling, and please say a word or two about why you think this particular moment was so good and what the scene may say about who you are as a person. Just a high point in your life. What stands out as the high point or one of the high points in your life?
The high point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know what? I guess the high point in my life might have been when my daughter was born, because I always wanted to be a mom. And like I said, I didn't get married until I was 27 or 28. And in my generation, that was old. And, you know, I was worried that in fact, I had considered adopting because I thought, I'm not going to meet anybody, I'm not ever going to get married. So that was probably a high point. In those few months that I got to stay home with her before I went back to work, my husband worked very close to us. I would walk over to eat lunch with him, you know, and carry the baby in the little front pack thing. I don't know what you call those things now. So those, you know, that year that I was pregnant and the first year of her life, well, maybe not the first year, at least the first 6 months or so before I had to go back to work. I had to go back to work after 2.5 months, but only for 5 weeks. And then I had that whole summer, and that was great. Yeah, I had a wonderful time. And what else was I supposed to say? The other people involved?
Or what would you say that this being a high point in your life says about who you are as a person?
Oh. Well, like I said, I always wanted to be a mom, and I always wanted to be a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I like to take care of people. So I think that's probably how that ties into that, you know, that was something I'd always wanted to do, and it's the kind of, even to this day, you know, I enjoy taking care of people, and I guess that's, I want to be able to make people's lives better.
Yeah. And switching gears a bit, thinking back over your entire life, could you please identify a scene that stands out as a low point, or even the lowest point in your life story?
Well, that's fairly easy, and that would be, oh gosh. I was going to say that the lowest point would be when the marriage was dissolving.
Mm.
But I'm not so sure that's true. Well, I guess those years that the marriage dissolved, and those years when my daughter was a teenager and things started going badly, and I felt like her focus on boys and having a boyfriend all the time, and then getting pregnant at 19. That was probably a low point.
Yeah.
Although, gosh, her life got so much worse after that, so it's hard to say. I guess, like I said before, if I can compartmentalize it, then those things just got worse and worse, but the rest of my life got better and better.
Yeah.
So.
And what would, when things really started to go south in your marriage and with everything that was going on with your daughter, do you remember what you were thinking and feeling when you first noticed that?
Well, the thing about the marriage is that the marriage did not go south within a very short time, and that was a long, long process. Mm-hmm. We had probably, I don't know, I was married to him for 18 years. We lived together for 16 years. It took 2 years to get divorced. Yeah. And I would say the last half of that was not good. Mm-hmm. But I was really committed to the sanctity of marriage, and we went to counseling several times. So I tried my best to hold things together, and just couldn't do it. It was too hard on the rest of the family.
Yeah. And with your low point involving your daughter, do you remember what you were thinking and feeling at the start of it all?
At the start of it all?
Yeah, when you first noticed that.
When I first found out that she was having sex, that she was sneaking around, it was a total shock. I mean, I was just like blown away.
Yeah.
And then worried, right away that she would get pregnant and screw up her life, and yeah.
And what would you say that these being the low points in your life story say about you as a person or about your life in general?
Read that again.
What would you say that these being the low points in your life story, what would you say that you viewing these as the low points in your story say about you as a person or about your life?
I don't know. I pictured growing up that I would, have the perfect home, and I would be married, and I would have children, and I would stay home and take care of them and bake cookies and blah, 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 and, what does that say about me? It was hard for me to deal with that or not working out. I don't know. I can't really answer that.
We can move on. And now, in looking back over your life, it may be possible to identify certain key moments that stand out as turning points, episodes that marked an important change in you or your life story. Please identify a particular episode in your life story that you now see as a turning point in your life. Again, for this event, please describe what happened, where and when it occurred, who was involved in what you were thinking and feeling, and please say a word or two about what you think this event says about you as a person or about your life.
A turning point. Well, rather than go through things that I've already gone through, because I've already mentioned a couple of turning points, the divorce and my daughter getting pregnant and her life kind of going downhill, I'll do a more positive one.
Okay.
I retired. I taught in public school for 26 years. Mm-hmm. And in the state of Missouri, you can retire at 25 years. And I waited for 26 years because the 1 year was half-time, so it didn't count. Yeah. So I retired from public school in 2000, and I was only 47 years old. I was the youngest retiree in the history of Kirkwood School District. But I knew I couldn't afford to really retire because I still had, my son was, that was 2000, so my son was in 5th grade at the time, and my daughter was still in high school. But you could draw your teacher pension from the state of Missouri and still work full-time as long as you weren't working in public school. Yeah. So I went to work in a Catholic school, and parents of my students suggested that I look for a job teaching computer classes because I had been very successful in involving my students in the things that we did in computer class while I was in Kirkwood School District. I really thought I was totally unprepared for that kind of a job, but when I started looking for what was available, there were jobs like that available, and so I decided. I talked to some other people about it and said, "Oh yeah, you could do that. You don't have to have a degree, and what they need is people who can show kids how to use computers for educational purposes instead of just playing games on them." And anyway, so I did that, and I kind of reinvented myself, which I'm pretty proud of that. I took some classes at the junior college that summer because the new job was the lab was all Windows-based computers, and I'd only used Macs in Kirkwood. Yeah. But I did that, and I had that first job for 8 years, and the people in that school thought I walked on water because the people they'd had before knew a lot about computers, but not anything about how to teach kids how to use computers to do projects to go along with other things that they were doing in their classes. So I did that, and then I went on. After 8 years, the priest they got a new priest who decided they didn't need a computer teacher, so I had to get a different job. And my last job for the last 10 years was in Ferguson, and a very diverse school especially for a Catholic school, diverse in racially, it was diverse, and also socioeconomic level, and actually even religiously, they weren't all Catholic kids. Yeah. I loved the school and loved the job. I didn't like the principal the first few years, but got a new principal, so that was nice. Yeah. It was nice to spend the last 5 or 6 years of my career in a job that I really liked so much and loved the people that I worked with. So I see that as a positive turning point.
Yeah. And now that we've covered a high point, a low point, and a turning point, I'm going to ask you to concentrate on another event that stands out especially strongly in your story. This event should be a key event, specific happening, a critical incident, or a significant episode in your past set in a particular time and place. So just a critical event more generally, and another event that was really important or significant in your life story.
A critical event. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess this is going to be another sad one, though. Well, my mother developed Alzheimer's, probably in 2015 or 2016.
Yeah.
She had heart surgery in 2014, and she was never quite the same after that, although the alternative would have been she might not have lived another 4 years. My father is the one who noticed it first, and we thought he was just imagining things or over-exaggerating, about her forgetting stuff because, my point with him is I forget things too, and I'm 20 years younger than her. Quit worrying about it so much, but she did, and I regret that I didn't retire a year earlier so that I could live with them at least half the time that last year, because she luckily did not get to the point with the erratic behavior and the anger issues that a lot of people who have Alzheimer's go through. She just kind of got to be not herself. She didn't do too much. She did get up and fix breakfast every day for them, but she didn't even seem to be aware of when to do other meals, so they ate out a lot, or family members. And then she died last January, and really it was, I think, kind of a gradual decline, and I felt like they needed to be getting more care, but they lived in a small town and they weren't. And anyway, they had already gone back to Florida after Christmas, and it was just a few days. They'd only been there for less than a week, I think.
Yeah.
My brother and his wife were there, and she got real lethargic, which my father at first thought that wasn't a concern because she would have days like that every once in a while, but this time she didn't get better, and they ended up taking her to the hospital. Turns out that she had had several mini strokes over a matter of months. I mean, they determined this, through scans.
Yeah.
And luckily she only lived, she went there on Sunday and died on Thursday. And my sister and I got there before she died. But that was a critical time.
I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah, I have to say, I do need to say that in many ways, it was, in most ways, it was a blessing that she died, because she didn't live through the misery of Alzheimer's.
Absolutely. It doesn't make it any easier, does it?
What?
It doesn't make it any easier at the end.
No. But it was a critical time, because I think we all assumed, including my dad, that he would die first, because he's 5 years older. She was 88, and he was 92. He's 93. And that kind of changed the direction. Well, actually, I had said that when I'd retire, I'd come live with him half-time anyway to help take care of Mom, but didn't turn out that way. Anyway.
I appreciate you sharing that. And we can move on to the next question.
Okay.
So, looking back over your entire life, could you please identify and describe a scene or period in your life, including the present time, wherein you personally confronted a major health problem, challenge, or crisis?
Oh.
Yeah, please describe what the health problem is or was and how it developed. If relevant, please discuss any experience you had with the healthcare system regarding this crisis or problem. In addition, please talk about how you coped with the problem and what impact this health crisis, problem, or challenge has had on you and your overall life story.
Okay, this one will be pretty easy, but I think I need to take a break and go to the bathroom.
Okay. All right, yeah. Just a major health problem, challenge, or crisis.
Okay, this is this is an easy one to do because I have had arthritis for many, many, many years, probably from, standing on a concrete floor as a teacher all those years.
Yeah.
And I had arthroscopic surgery on my right knee when I was 40 years old, and that worked fine. But then when I was, I must say 5 or 6 years later, the left knee started being a problem, and that was also the years that my marriage was breaking up, and I was too concentrated on other things and ignored it. So it got to the point where I had a partial knee replacement when I think it was like 55, because that's what the doctor recommended, where they just replace half of your knee because it was grinding on one half but not the other. And that worked for 9 months, and then a ligament ripped in my knee. And I limped around for the rest of the school year, and the fix for that was to do a total knee replacement the next summer. So 2006 and 2007. And the same doctor both times.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that one did not work either. And eventually it got worse and worse. And my left leg kind of got bow-legged, and I limped all the time. And I was convinced that, well, not convinced, but worried that was going to be the rest of my life. And that got to be more and more debilitating. I mean, I was still working full-time, but I was in terrible pain, and some of the time I did take medication. For a few years, I think I was even on prednisone for like 2 or 3 years straight.
Yeah.
I did switch doctors after about 3 years from that surgery, and the new doctor tried to get me to have the knee replaced again, but it took him until 2016 to talk me into doing that. But that was such a great thing, because before that I couldn't walk very far. It had gotten to the point where I really couldn't even walk the dog around the block.
Yeah.
It was so bad. And the new doctor, with this time it's called a knee revision because they're redoing it, and he actually said, there's another doctor here in my practice that's done this more often, so I'm going to have him do the surgery and I'll just do the assisting, which is just amazing that people will admit, someone else can do this better. And I'm so grateful because it's completely changed my life. I mean, I was headed down the road of just not being very mobile at all.
Yeah.
And I can't walk. I can't walk for miles, but I can walk and do what I want to do, and my legs it's straight, and the surgery was better. The recovery was easier. Everything about it was so much better. I mean, if you talk about bad experiences with the healthcare system, I feel like that other the first doctor was collecting a fee and playing golf or something. But the second one, I can't say enough wonderful things about him. Really, it's just, and overall, I'm very satisfied with healthcare.
Yeah.
So.
And now, I'd next like you to describe a specific event or moment from your life in which you became aware of your ethnic and cultural background. Please provide me with as much detail as possible about this event and how this event has affected the way you think about your own cultural background or culture.
Well, I grew up in southeast Missouri on a cotton farm. So there really was no ethnic diversity in my life, I'm sorry to admit. There were people who worked for my father on the farm, but they were also white. There were blacks that lived not that far away, and they sometimes would chop cotton or pick cotton for other farmers, but not very often for my dad, because he had other people that lived there on the farm. And also he had, cheap labor in his children. He did pay us, but not a lot.
Yeah.
So I was an adult, really, before there was much diversity in my life. schools supposedly, were integrated in 1954, and I was born in 52, but my school was not really integrated until we consolidated with another school that was in a rural area that was a very black neighborhood. And that I was in high school at that point.
Yeah.
I was friends with a couple of young women who were black, but I did not really experience much diversity at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the question is, when did you become aware of your ethnicity?
Yeah. In relation to others.
Well, I grew up in the 60s.
Yeah.
And, but to be honest, a lot of the civil rights movement that went down during the 60s, I really was not aware of a lot of it until the 80s.
Okay.
Until I was teaching that.
Mm-hmm.
Because my father would turn the television off.
Yeah.
I've asked him about that since, I said, Dad, that really seems racist to me. He says, I was not a racist. I'm not a racist. I just didn't want I didn't want to watch that stuff. And he's kind of like that even now. He don't want to watch negative things. He reads the paper, but he doesn't want to watch it on television. So I don't know if that was him trying to protect us or what.
Yeah. So,
sadly, I don't think that I knew all the horrible things until I was,
teaching.
And, been teaching for quite a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How would you say that realization has shaped the way you think about your cultural background or culture?
Well, I feel like, is it my fault that all these things happen? Not personally, but I do feel like whites as a whole have mistreated Native Americans, blacks, many other cultures. And I feel like we need to go out of our way to make amends for that. Mm-hmm. One of the things I did do as a teacher is through the Voluntary Interdistrict Coordinating Council. Yeah. The same organization that organized students from the city, black students from the city coming to the county to go to school.
Yeah.
Well, in the 80s, they also organized sending white teachers into the city. Mm-hmm. You probably wouldn't even be aware of this because I don't think they do it anymore. But I was a transfer teacher for 1 year in 1985-86. Mm-hmm. I was still employed by Kirkwood School District, but I taught in the city school district that year. Yeah. I taught in a school that was, to be honest, I don't know that it was that much more integrated than the school I was in Kirkwood. I want to say the population was probably 30-something, 30 to 40% black, and that's about what it was in Kirkwood. Yeah. So, but in a lot of ways it was very different other than that, though, because we didn't have all the materials and everything. Yeah. And I tried to make sure that I, as a teacher in Kirkwood, tried to do as much as I could to teach some of the things about the civil rights movement, and also in that sounds really tacky to say it that way. I tried to use a lot of literature that was more diverse, things like that.
Now, in looking back over your life story, could you please identify the single person or group of people that have had the greatest positive influence on your story? In other words, please identify the best character in your life story.
A person?
Mm-hmm. And please describe this person, group or organization and the way in which he, she, or they have had a positive impact on your story. Best character.
Okay, am I just supposed to focus on a character or a group, or both?
Well, if it's a single character, if it's a group or an organization, just there's no right or wrong answer to this question. So it's however.
Okay, go back and read the very beginning of it again.
Could you please identify the single person or group of people that have had the greatest positive influence on your story?
Oh, okay. Well, that would be my family then. Particularly my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And probably my mother more than my father, because I grew up in an era where moms always stayed home.
Yeah.
And Dad farmed the farm, and he did eat lunch with us every day, and he ate supper. Well, he ate all meals with us. You know, he was around, but Mom was the one who did most of the parenting.
Yeah.
And so I think that's... At first I was going to say the church, but, you know, they're the ones who took me to the church, so...
Your parents. And what would you say was the most significant, lasting, positive impact your mother had left on your life story?
This will be a lot easier in 5 years.
Yeah.
My mother she might get frustrated and annoyed with you, but she did never give. And I like to think that I have learned that skill from her.
Yeah.
You know, it's okay to say, this is not okay, but it's not okay to give up.
Yeah. And now looking back over your life story, could you please identify the single person or group of people that have had the greatest negative influence on your story? In other words, please identify the worst character in your life story, and please describe this person, group, or organization and the way in which he, she, or they have had a negative impact on your story.
The worst character? Oh my.
Yeah. The person who's left the most negative impact, who had the most negative impact on your life.
The most negative, the first person that comes to my mind was that principal I worked for, but that was just in the last 10 years, and so that would not be the most negative impact of my entire life. What would be the most negative impact of my life? I don't know. I can't answer that, because I mean, there have been some negative characters over the years, but I never let those people really control me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how to do that.
I guess if you think of one of those characters as having threatened the positive aspects of your life, like, more significantly than any other character.
Well, that might be my husband.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it might be, because...
All those years.
Yeah, it just felt like no matter what I did, things, you know, he was And the thing is, he wasn't an evil person. You know, he's a very, very nice person, very easy to talk to, but didn't ever grow up.
Yeah.
You know, he just did not grow up, and that really drugged down our quality of life.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I don't think I realized how much it was dragging it down until we were. And he was happier after the divorce too.
Yeah.
Because he just couldn't really be a father. He was a great daddy. Do you know the difference? You know, he was a great daddy when the kids were little to do the fun stuff, but he couldn't be a parent. And my daughter said later on, I don't really think of Dad as a dad, but just more of as a fun uncle.
Yeah.
So I guess that's who it would be.
And now, in looking back over your love life, it may be possible to identify certain key moments that stand out as turning points, episodes that marked an important change in you or your story. Could you please identify a particular episode in your love life that you now see as a turning point? If you can't identify a turning point that stands out clearly, please describe some event in your love life wherein you went through an important change of some kind. The event you choose to describe may or may not involve your current romantic partner, if you have one. Again, for this event, please describe what happened, where and when, who was involved, and what you were thinking and feeling. And please say a word or two about what you think this event says about you as a person or about your love life in general. So a turning point in your love life. A time wherein you went through a significant or important change of some kind.
I guess the turning point would be when I got married, you know, because I felt like that was a dream come true.
Yeah.
Because now I could have children and raise a family, and I foolishly thought that I could also stay home and take care of my kids, but financially that was never an option.
Yeah.
So I guess that would be it.
Do you remember what you were thinking and feeling at the time when you got married?
Do I remember what I was thinking and feeling?
At the time.
I was thinking, well, I met my husband at church, and a lot of men I had dated in the past had not been involved in the church at all, and so I thought that was a dream come true. And his father had been a Methodist minister, and at this time I didn't know about all the bad things about the history with his father, and actually later on I wasn't aware that his parents did not even live together at the end of his father's life. I never met his father. His father died when he was 20 or 22 or so of heart disease. Mm-hmm. And his mom was a Methodist minister when I met him. So, you know, I thought that this was going to all be wonderful. Yeah.
What would you say this being the turning point in your love life says about you as a person or about your love life in general?
Well, the reason I'm laughing is because I'm very, very careful about not wanting my granddaughters to listen to the old fairy tales where, and they all lived happily ever after, you know, after the man comes to rescue the woman. Well, I grew up with that life, you know, where in a small town, women were supposed to get married shortly after high school, certainly after college, and raise a family, and you weren't really a worthy person if you weren't married. Mm-hmm. And so I guess that's what that says about me, but thank goodness I've lived past that, and I'm, you know, I think of myself as a very strong woman now, and hope that that's what my granddaughters will be.
Yeah. Absolutely. So your first interview with us was July of 2010, which was 8 years and 7 months ago. So looking back over the past 8.5 years roughly, since your first interview with us, what were your hopes, dreams, and goals during that time, and do you believe that you've achieved them?
Yes, I do believe I've achieved them. 8 years ago, let's see, I'd already changed jobs at that point. Well, I remember thinking, I hope this job lasts for several more years, because I wasn't sure that it was, and I didn't want to have to look for a job again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I taught school till I was 44 years, and the reason I was able to do that is I negotiated a deal to work 3 days a week instead of 5 days a week the last 4 years. And, that was an idea that I came up with, and I worked that out myself. And like I said before, I kept learning so many new things teaching computer classes. I mean, in the beginning, I knew how to teach kids how to use computers, and by the end, I was doing a lot of the the fixing of problems on computers and the entry-level stuff, not serious things. I mean, I learned so much, and I just feel like I look back at that, I'm kind of amazed at that. And I have managed to live to the point where my son finally moved out of my house. And, have a little bit of money to work on the house and do things, and, have more space and don't feel so crowded, and can do things on my own timetable. And yet I have a lot of time to volunteer and help other people, and that's what I wanted to do. And so, yeah.
Are there any other hopes, dreams, or goals you can think of, or that you'd want to talk about?
The hopes and dreams for the future?
That you might have had 8 years ago, other things that you might have wanted, besides from meeting your work goals, like seeing your son move out, anything else you...
Yeah, well, I wanted my children to be happy, and I feel like Ned is really happy.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah.
As far as my hopes and dreams for my daughter, they've just gone downhill. Yeah. I mean, I feel like things are worse.
Yeah. But Ned's happy.
Yeah, he is. And the younger granddaughter, I think, seems to be pretty happy too. I mean, she does see a therapist every week, but to be honest, I think she sees a therapist because it's the 1 hour of the week where an adult has her undivided attention, other than spending time with me. And she doesn't do that very often, and I sometimes think she doesn't do it because she's worried that her mother will not like that.
Yeah. And now your life story includes key chapters and scenes from your past, as you've described, but it also includes how you see or imagine your future. So can you please describe what you see to be the next chapter in your life? Okay,
well, the coming chapter, or the chapter that I'm in right now, is, like I said, I live with my father half the time.
Yeah.
And he's 93, that could last 2 weeks or another 10 years. Probably not 10 years. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that he'll live several more years, because for 93 he's very healthy.
Yeah.
On the other hand, at 93, anything could happen.
Yeah.
After that time, my life will be in some ways easier, and I hope at that point I will be able to do more volunteering, which is one of the things I want to do in retirement. But a lot of volunteer jobs, you need to be able to commit to being around every week.
Yeah.
And I can't do that. So, that, and I hope that my son will get married and have children before I'm too old to help take care of them.
Yeah.
And enjoy them. I hope and pray that my that my granddaughter will either get back in school or successfully do homeschooling. And she says she wants to go on to college, so go on to college. It's okay with me if she doesn't go to college, but I want her to finish school, and I want her to have more of a social life.
Yeah.
I also would hope and pray that my daughter's family will come back to the church, because I feel like a lot of their issues are that when she married her husband, who's an atheist, she decided to leave the church and has more or less convinced her children to do the same. They did keep coming to church with me for several years, but I think the youngest one started questioning why, and so they told her that all those stories about God and Jesus are just made up, and so that's a conflict for her.
Yeah.
And the older one left the church. They've been convinced by their mom and their stepdad that Christianity really doesn't make any sense, that as an intellectual there's really no reason for that, and I feel like that's the absence of hope in their life has made things so much worse. So I guess that is my biggest hope and dream.
Yeah. Lastly, I'd like to ask you to provide me with a life theme. So, looking back over your entire life as a story, with chapters and scenes, can you identify a central theme, message, or idea that runs throughout your life? And if so, can you describe this? Can you describe this theme? A life theme.
A life theme, I think, for me would be nurturing. Teaching, taking care of others. Both in your family and in the rest of the world.
That's the end of the interview. We really appreciate you sharing your story with us, because by sharing your story, you've helped future generations better understand what your life was like and how we can improve people's lives in the future through research. So now that we've finished this part of our interview, I can be more responsive again.
Okay.